Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Debbie Hart, the President and CEO of BioNJ, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for this very special program. BioNJ has been working very deliberately to increase health equity in clinical trials over the past year and a half, and you'll hear about one of those initiatives on that front today. And please let us know if you'd like additional information on the other initiatives. And so while many companies in New Jersey want to increase, want to increase diversity in clinical trials, there's currently no unified platform through which companies can, or there wasn't just a few months ago, through which companies can exchange strategies and share their initiatives. So in June of this year, we debuted our best practices database, where companies can share their work and projects, and industry professionals can find examples from which to learn. So companies such as the three you'll hear from today, BMS, J&J, and Novartis, as well as Amicus Therapeutics, Eli Lilly, Medidata, Merck, Regeneron, PTC Therapeutics, and Sanofi, and countless others have shared examples of their work in the areas of patient recruitment and engagement, workforce development, decentralized trials, technologies, and more. And right now, there are more than 70 assets featured there. If you haven't done so already, please share your organization's health equity and clinical trials initiatives. We would love to have them up there. So you should be able to see the URL on the screen right now where you can locate that database, and hopefully you will add to it. Only by discovering new approaches, utilizing new technologies, and developing new business standards can we make trials more accessible and ensure that no patient is ever left behind. To that end, we are excited to bring the community together this afternoon for our first Health Equity and Clinical Trials Best Practices webinar, focused on examples from which to learn and opportunities for collaboration. So today's program is meant to be interactive, so please don't be shy. We welcome your ideas, sharing them. Please ask questions, explore possible opportunities for collaboration. Again, that's really what this is all about. So we will kick this off by learning about 3 innovative initiatives which have the potential to be game changers, after which we will open the floor for audience Q&A and an open discussion. Please feel free to either put your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box. And we are recording today's presentations to be posted later on BioNJ's website at bionj.org. So let's get started. To kick us off, we are going to hear about Janssen's Research Includes Me program from Vice President of Portfolio Delivery Operations, Global Development for Janssen and J&J, Stacey Hargraves. Stacey, welcome. Thanks for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to talk about something I know that we're all passionate about, but I'm equally excited about, I'm sure, as my peers. To introduce you all to something that we've been doing for a number of years. We've been in the health equity clinical trial space for probably, this is probably on our 4th or 5th year. If you go to the next slides, please. One of the things that we have identified early on, right, is the ability to connect with the community. And it's important to really not just connect, but think about how you connect with the community when it comes to diversity and equity in clinical trials. So what I'd like to talk to you today about is just our Research Includes Me initiative. We pride ourselves on really setting industry trends in this space because we've had it for quite some time. But more importantly, we want to make sure we're using inclusive practices and how you interact and engage with underrepresented communities. So what Research Includes Me is, it's actually researchincludesme.com. It's a program, an enterprise-wide program for us where we're introducing communities of color, initially here in the US, around what it means to participate in clinical trials. As we've been on this journey for some time, as I said before, one of the things that we acutely heard from people who were interested in talking about clinical trials and community-based forum is something that I've often heard from many people is to, stop talking to them when we have something to give or something to a product or something to attach to. And so we recognize that and realize that in order to have a really robust conversation with communities about participation in clinical trials, it needed to be agnostic of product. It needed to be agnostic of anything we're developing from a company perspective. So Research Includes Me is not attached to anything that we're in development from a Janssen or J&J perspective. And it really just talks about foundational information about what it means to participate in a clinical trial. It's important because we know that diversity of clinical trials into ensuring investigative medicine is safe for everyone as possible, that we need to have diverse representation. And in order to increase that enrollment, we really need to make sure that we're touching as many people of color. And I would actually say from a diversity perspective, and that diversity spectrum is very wide, that we have diverse representation for the products that we're developing to make sure that they're in use for those we intend to treat, and that includes everyone. Next slide, please. So for our Research Includes Me program, we engage directly in the communities, right, and provide educational materials. We really dug into this when we were doing our COVID vaccine development. Obviously, it was a trying time for everyone in industry and for the country and globally for that matter. But what we did take this opportunity to really use mobile units, right, even during COVID, to talk about what it means to participate in a clinical trial. And I would say that, the COVID vaccine was a pivotal, time from an industry perspective, from diversity in clinical trials. Those who have been in this for some time, I know a number of us are on this call, and those probably on the line listening. We've been talking about diversity in clinical trials for years, right? I think the COVID exacerbated it, and then we found everybody in industry, talking about how to increase diversity in clinical trials. And so during that particular time, we found that, again, the Research Includes Me brand was agnostic of products, but people wanted to talk locally. And we were, in the Southeast, we were in the Northeast, West Coast as well. And we used that opportunity to introduce digital resources, really not just give out pamphlets, a standard way to interact with potential patients or participants, but also introduce them to an online platform, again, agnostic, that just talks about step-by-step, phase 1 through phase 4. What does it mean? What does it mean to, sign an informed consent? It's also language equipped, right? So it's bilingual. And it really just was a baseline to get a conversation going within the community. The next thing I say is, from an industry perspective, we can't do this by ourselves. Sometimes you like to be our own message carriers, but it's also good to participate and partner with, community-based programs, whether it's, National Churches Association, National Medical Association, UNIDOS, patient advocacy groups. There's a natural partnership that needs to happen and go along with this. Next slide. Some of the campaign highlights you will see on the left, something we're very proud is one of our mobile units. We have many of them, and these travel the country. And we, again, I firmly believe for us to tackle the challenge ahead of all of us, is there's no one company that can do this by themselves, right? So while you may see a mobile unit that's branded as Janssen, it's from my perspective, it's something we all share, because again, it's not just Janssen that does this from a community perspective in terms of education. It's all of us who need to really band together across this spectrum that we call diversity in clinical trials in order to change the landscape of what we believe we need to do from a drug development perspective. The other thing is just really looking at, bilingual means to communicate with the communities, whether it's Facebook Live events, whether it's Instagram, whether it's the new TikTok craze. Really meeting people where they are and how they consume information is important to us. The other thing I would say is, we're learning over time that there are generational gaps and differences. And I often say, some of our older generations, when you think about diversity, especially from an African-American perspective, we reference Tuskegee and all the other things that have happened historically at Henrietta Lacks. But as I travel the country and start to talk to younger generations, they may not have the same barriers that want to participate as others do. From a younger demographic, their stories are different, their willingness will be different. So one of the things that we're also doing with Research Include Me is expanding that diaspora of how do you reach people of different ages and ethnic groups, and recognize where they are in terms of potential participation. I know this is just a snapshot. I'm eager to hand over to my other colleagues as well in terms of what we're doing from a Johnson & Johnson perspective. But the Research Includes Me was foundational for us. It's something we continue to capitalize on in terms of how we're interacting with the community. And I'm happy to talk through if you have any questions you might have about how we've engaged with the communities as we continue on diversity in clinical trials journey. So I'll turn it back over to Debbie.
Thank you so much, Stacy. That was terrific. And once again, we will open the floor to Q&A at the end of our 3 presentations. And thank you again, Stacy. And next, to share valuable information on the Beacon of Hope program, a 10-year commitment initiated by Novartis and the U.S. Novartis Foundation. Please welcome Head of U.S. Corporate Responsibility and President of the U.S. Novartis Foundation, Dr. Linda Armstrong. Linda, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. And thank you, Randy and BioNJ, for giving me this opportunity to speak about Novartis-led initiative to advance health equity in clinical trials. And we call, as Debbie mentioned, we call the initiative Beacon of Hope. So the next slide is my disclaimer around forward-leaning statements. And then next slide, please. So Beacon of Hope was an initiative, as Stacy mentioned, like many companies, it was started in response to the US experience during the early pandemic. And then we saw a disproportionate impact on communities that have been historically underserved. And we know that disparities in health outcomes are nothing new. They've existed for generations. But realizing that the chance of death from COVID literally doubled based on the zip code where you lived made this really impossible to ignore. Beyond COVID, we know healthcare disparities exist in diseases like cardiovascular disease, breast cancer, and they are devastating both on a personal level, but also expensive for us overall. Next slide. So health inequities exist for many reasons, and like all complex problems, a systemic approach is required. So as a company, like many of our companies whose mission it is to save and improve lives, we thought about ways that we were positioned to help. And so Beacon of Hope was designed to maximize social impact. It was co-created with trusted members of the community. It's a long-term commitment, as Debbie mentioned. It's $50 million over 10 years, and it's collaborative with 40 academic, nonprofit, and industry partners. Next slide. So how are we working with these partners to improve health disparities? I'll talk briefly about the two pillars to the left and right, and spend a little more time on the pillar in the middle. So we are empowering the next generation of STEM workers through establishing scholarships, mentorships, and internships for students who attend the 29 partner schools and who are concentrating in STEM fields. We're also supporting scientific inquiry into health disparities through research grants and by establishing 2 centers of excellence committed to research, education, and advocacy around topics that affect patient health, like climate and health, and around clinical algorithms and making sure that they don't unfairly impact underserved communities. But most relevant to this audience is through Beacon of Hope, we've established clinical trial centers of excellence at each of the historically Black medical college medical schools. So Meharry, Howard, Morehouse School of Medicine, and Charles Drew. And these are schools that have a unique history and a mission of serving disadvantaged communities. Our mission is to work with the schools and our partners to enhance their research ecosystems, to increase their capacity and capabilities, paving the way for these sites to become top-tier research centers. Now, we've encountered opportunities and challenges in the first 2 years of Beacon of Hope. Schools are underfunded, the endowments aren't large enough to provide protected research time for faculty, and many patients that they serve have multiple comorbidities that preclude their meeting inclusion and exclusion criteria. However, we've also found that these institutions have deep trust and engagement in the communities they serve, and we're committed to working with them to make sure that these centers of excellence grow and succeed. We have one site is already participating in multiple trials, and others are engaged in feasibility assessments. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, between academic, industry, nonprofit partners, we have about 40 organizations participating in some capacity. In the first 2 years, we've defined our mission and objectives. In the next year, we'll refine how we work together to achieve them. And since this slide was submitted, we have already welcomed ICON as an industry partner. Partners have committed both financial and in-kind support to enhance the clinical trial ecosystem, be it through new clinical trial management systems, through Advara, or recruiting and training through Verb, sustainability through engagement of big and small pharma. through these centers, we're also learning how to engage other sites with diverse patient pools so we can make better therapies by ensuring that our trial populations resemble the patients who will eventually receive the medications. Next slide. So there's no easy or fast remedy for this. And I would just like to thank everyone who is currently involved in Beacon of Hope, some of you through Novartis, through other companies. Reasons for health equity are complex and generational, but through long-term commitment and collaboration, we hope that we're well positioned to make a positive change. So thank you. And Debbie, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda. Terrific. And I'm so proud that, so many BioNJ member companies are part of your Beacon of Hope initiative. And again, very proud of that. That's very exciting. So next, to tell us about SOGI's data collection and a clinical trials implications assessment for disabled patients developed by Bristol Myers Squibb, I'd ask you to please welcome the head of clinical trials engagement and enrollment, Sharon Hanlon. Sharon, thank you so much for being with us, and I am turning the floor over to you.
So hopefully you can hear me. Thank you, Debbie, and really happy to be here to share is two of our case examples of moving beyond race and ethnicity. I think a common theme I've heard in my two predecessors' presentations was around collaboration. And this, the two examples that I'll share with you are definitely collaborative efforts more broadly within Bristol Myers Squibb. Next slide, please. So as we all know, diversity is not a one-dimensional concept. And as you can see from a lot of the pictures on this slide, it takes very many forms and many types across our continuum. Next slide. So within the Bristol Myers Squibb Diversity in Clinical Trials program, our overarching mission has really, at a corporate level, is to transform patients' lives through science. And certainly within the diversity activity, really looking to have fair and just opportunities for patients across the continuum of the diverse space. Our efforts really look to be process-driven and ultimately to achieve sustainability. We really want to make sure that this becomes business as usual and that we continue to focus on outcomes in terms of increasing the opportunity for participation in clinical trials to all patients. And certainly looking, leveraging those opportunities to accelerate innovation, drug development, and always aligned with what feedback we're hearing from our health authorities. Next slide, please. This slide just provides an overview of how we approach diversity in clinical trials. And, we have a series of areas of focus. Anything from our site selection activities to how we develop our protocols, how we support patients, and certainly with training across the entire continuum. The next two examples I'm going to share with you are our collaborative efforts that our diversity in clinical trials team did, working closely with two of our people and business resource or affinity groups. One is our LGBTQI+ activity and focuses on the collection of SOGI's data. For folks that may not be familiar with the term SOGI's, SOGI's refers to sexual orientation, gender identity, and intersex status. And in January of this year, working closely with our Pride resource group, as well as others within the broader development organization, we approached and looked at a way to start to collect optional sexual orientation, gender identity, and intersex status data collection. What we did, we wanted to ensure that it was optional, and we looked to studies that included our electronic patient-reported outcome. In most cases, it was a tablet format that the patients were able to opt in or opt out to sharing their data. This data is included as part of their interaction at a site level, but it's data that we're keeping certainly separate from the database so that it doesn't slow down the data collection process. As of January this year, we launched SOGI's collection. It's currently active in 9 of our studies. And it's a series of 4 questions, initially focused on identification of sex at birth, identification of sexual orientation, gender identity, and intersex status. There's a series of explanations as far as to really provide them the background information. And again, as has been stated, it's completely optional for the patients, as well as even before that at a site level. We are hoping, we're monitoring closely the completion of that data, and we're seeing already data coming in as far as the collection is concerned, and we'll continue to raise awareness and certainly monitoring the progress of collection of that data. So definitely more to come as far as our SOGI's collection is concerned. Next slide. The other example that I want to share with you was in partnership with our disabilities people and business resource group. And this is certainly an example where disabled patients in some cases are unfairly similar to the LGBTQI population, may not get the same support in their clinical trial journey, may not even be enrolled in clinical trial activities. Certainly looking at how do we address ensuring, first off, accessibility. Are disabled patients able to get access to the clinical trial sites? Are with the Americans with Disabilities Act, are they able to even access the site in that regard? So as we talked about how best to approach this particular situation and how to expand, we wanted to identify a partner to work with, and we worked with a company called Disability Solution to look at and to complete an assessment. The assessment was a 9-month assessment, interviewing both internal and external stakeholders, looking at our procedural documents and evaluating our sites, in some cases interviewing some of the sites that we worked with to understand how they approached ableism. We had a readout recently, so this is very recent outputs from that assessment. And some proposed solutions was really looking at our templated language in the informed consent, as well as broader templated languages in some of our awareness materials, as well as our recruitment materials to really be more inclusive from both an imagery as well as content perspective. Conducting training, both internally and externally at the site level, and then certainly looking at potential enhancements to our data collection activities. The schematic on the right really identifies the patient journey and looks at all of the potential places where there could be an opportunity for us to really enhance opportunities for patients with disabilities. So more to come as far as this is concerned. As I said, we're still assessing proposed solutions. And, that'll be certainly the next part of our journey as a company in the space of disabled individuals as part of our diversity activities. We continue as a company to look for opportunities to address diversity. The other big effort as far as diversity, and I think some of my predecessors also touched on the fact, looking at both we started from a very US centric perspective, but also now expanding and certainly as we explore to other countries, looking at diversity means different things. So these are sort of two additional examples where, the definition of diversity takes many forms, and looking for ways to continue to advance our reach. The other is certainly our data collection, and looking for ways to expand our data collection to more encompass some of those various dimensions. So with that, I will hand things back to Debbie, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharon. Really appreciate it. I could not agree more on your comment about, looking forward to the day that this is business as usual. We often say at BioNJ, we're looking forward to the day when we just don't even need to think about this anymore. But we have a ways to go. We appreciate the fact that all three of your companies and others are working on it. Meanwhile, I love the diversity of the ideas that we heard today. And so Stacy, Linda, Sharon, we appreciate you sharing them. Thank you so much. At this point, we're going to open the floor for questions from our audience. I invite you to please place your name and your company in your webcam so that you can, others will know from whom they are hearing. And you can add them by clicking on the three small dots in the upper right corner of your webcam. And you could please raise your hand, and I will call on you if you haven't used the chat. Meanwhile, there is actually one question I did see already in the chat, in addition to at least one comment on appreciation for the presentation. But the one question, there are actually a couple questions, but first one is for Linda. So Linda, how does a company apply for membership to the Beacon of Hope program?
Yeah, thank you. So we've evolved a bit in how we accept new members. When we first started, we were looking for companies who have, kind of share our principles, which was wonderful. But now that we have, a larger number, particularly of industry partners, we are looking to really fill the needs of the sites. So when if a company is interested in joining, we already have a full needs assessment from the sites, and if we think that they may be, interested in providing in-kind support, we bring these sites together and to see if this is something that they would be interested in, and if the answer is yes, then they're definitely welcome to join. Companies with who are interested in the financial support of students, or research grants, also very interested to have those conversations. But I think short term, feel free to reach out to me, and I could direct you. But we have some wonderful partners, and I think there's a lot that we could do to grow even more to support these sites.
Terrific, thank you. And for anyone who is trying to reach out to anyone else on this call, please do not hesitate to reach out to our team at BioNJ. We'll be very happy to make those connections. So thank you. So question here, could the panelists please share more information about your engagement with faith-based communities? So let's see, maybe Stacy, you want to start?
Yes. So, our initial approach with engagement with faith-based communities just came through, core networking through, individuals that we have at our corporate affairs within J&J, a lot of our ERGs that we have internally within J&J, and just leveraging a number of individual relationships to work with some of the larger faith-based communities. What we found, though, is those are great. And we have a number of those in place. I mentioned a few of them. A lot of, faith-based initiatives and faith-based organizations happen locally, right? So I think a lot of ways that we're starting to recognize is having a local connection, whether that's, in a city or a specific town, is building those localized relationships to tap into that in terms of who to reach out locally, from a faith-based or any other localized organization. You will always have your, central large US-based organizations. But the other thing I would say is, think of ways to use patient advocates, localized types of, sites and site-based relationships, to really, establish a local presence that will mean something to the individuals who are either patients or participants. So you're building that trust through that avenue. So we've worked our way through step by step in terms of who and how we're engaging from a faith-based perspective.
Thank you, Stacy. Sharon, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, we recognize certainly, far too often we've heard the feedback loud and clear around kind of that helicopter approach where we, when a trial it impacts a particular part of the population that we kind of descend on. I had one colleague refer to it as the body snatchers, descending down looking for patients to recruit into a trial, and then once the trial's over, where is pharma? What are they doing? So definitely looking for more ways to my comments around striving for permanence. How do we build those long-standing relationships? We've had been working on contact with a few faith-based organizations to better kind of provide an integrated way of engaging with populations, partnering with them on training activities, awareness activities, really focusing on education. We found it's critically important to build those relationships, and build those relationships that continue well beyond the trial. So I think it's critically important, and it's definitely something we've factored into some of our approach from a clinical trial diversity perspective.
Thank you, Sharon. Linda, anything you'd like to share?
Sure. So I think Stacy and Sharon have covered a lot. We have also done some work with faith-based organizations, specifically Choose Healthy Life, which is a collaboration of faith-based, but it's not religious affiliation at all, but kind of faith-based church health-related initiatives. And so, they focus on screening and prevention. And then also, we're working with them around clinical trial awareness. What is a clinical trial? What are the benefits? What are the risks? So that people are at least aware of what trials are and how they can become involved if that's something that they're interested in. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And so I'll throw this next question out, which came in from the audience, and then I'll, open it up to all three of you, whoever would like to take a crack at it. So how do you address concerns about lack of trust within the African American community? This particular person is saying that they always hear people use Tuskegee as a reason why they don't want to get involved in a clinical trial. So any thoughts on that front? Linda, you look like you're
Sure,
ready
I'd be
to
happy
jump
to
at this
start.
one.
Yeah.
Sure. Mhm.
I as someone who was a history science major in college at the time that Tuskegee we're really understanding what happened. I understand that this was a grave misjustice, but I would say that often it's not, people don't have to be historians to be mistrustful in the healthcare system and the clinical trial system. I think sometimes lack of respect and lack of transparency, just in their day-to-day dealings, have made them mistrustful. And so I think there's also some very interesting data to suggest that when people take the time to sit down and explain trials and explain what what's involved. There's really no difference between communities of who will consent and who will decline. So what our ask to the sites is that just ask. Be sure that you ask. Don't think that you know more than the patient does just based on your first impression, because that might not be correct. I think another piece that we found that I think is sometimes helpful is that people tend to respond more or better, at least at the beginning, to site managers or site personnel or PIs that are part of their community or that are sensitive to issues in their community. So working with investigators and working to grow the number of diverse site coordinators and trialists, I think is also a very important part of clinical trial equity.
Thank you. Stacy or Sharon?
I mean, the only thing that I'll add, and Linda did a great job in terms of the response, is, I think from my perspective, trust is a very personal journey, right? We all know, individually, to build trust with the individual takes time. And as Linda spoke about, there is a long storied history, right, that we know to understand and completely appreciate in a number of the instances, whether it's, again, Tuskegee or Henrietta Lacks. But what I also say is, I use myself as an example. I have many people, even my own personal family, who, because of trust or other reasons, history, won't sign up for a clinical trial ever. But from a personal perspective, what I hope all of us do, and all of us start to introduce who are in the industry or just have a vested interest in how to do this, is start to just talk about and educate the why, the importance. So it may not be an option for them personally, and that's perfectly fine. But that family member who does have a question or who is interested, at least be able to inform what that process could look like. And over time, generationally, we will continue to build trust in the process because we're teaching each other what it means to participate in a clinical trial. But I make no, illusion that, this is a wide swath of people. As soon as we give them information, they will sign up. That's not going to happen. But over time, I believe we will slowly chip at those who don't necessarily want to participate, don't have trust in the process at all, that we are slowly beginning to educate and make people aware so that they can make their own informed choice. And at the end of the day, that's all we aim to do, at least from my perspective. I hope that we're aiming to do.
Thank you, Stacy. And Sharon, anything?
Nothing further to add. I mean, I think they've both done a great job addressing the question.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So there is another question in the chat. Can you please share more on how you've worked with or leveraged ERGs, employee resource groups, to inform and/or execute these initiatives? And I think, Sharon, you may have specifically mentioned that, but Linda and Stacy, if you have anything you'd like to mention as well, you're more than welcome. So Sharon, over to you first.
Yeah, from our perspective, they've been a valuable contribution. And I think, to me, one way to really leverage the employee resource groups is to include them in a lot of the activities. We've, particularly for us, they've got the direct lens in a lot of cases into both cultural relevance as well as other activities, and can certainly help us message things appropriately. We worked closely with our employee resource groups to create an advisory board that we leverage. My team is responsible for a lot of the recruitment materials. We use them to review our materials as sounding boards with any activities that we're looking to advance, and really making them part of it. And in our case, the two examples that I shared wouldn't have happened without the passion and the drive that the employee resource folks brought to the conversation. They knew experts that we could reach out to have the conversation, and they've continued even after the results to maintain a vested interest. So my encourage would be to include them every step of the way. It's an extra stakeholder, but they provide valuable input into the process, and then also help us. They're boots on the ground to really help us with launches of the activities, and the passion is actually the area I'm greatly thankful for, because they keep us honest as far as moving it forward, and certainly addressing to the earlier question some of the trust issues, because it's coming from folks that have a vested interest.
Thank you. Other two panelists, anything you want to add?
The only thing I'll add is this year we launched our Research Includes Me internal ambassador program. And as I talked about, the internal ambassador program, linked to RIM, as we call it, again, agnostic of product, but what it is doing is equipping our employees to talk about diversity in clinical trials, the importance of clinical trials. If you can think of the size of our organization, we have a commercial organization, we did have a consumer product information, but when we're talking about trials, it doesn't know any type of enterprise sector, right, in terms of how the organization. So there are parts of our industry sometimes that don't understand R&D and what it means to be in a clinical trial from an employee-based perspective. So what their ambassador program does is educate them foundationally on the drug development process, and then the clinical trial process, and then why the importance of diversity. And this is all done through the ERGs. We launch it through the ERGs first. If you think about our OLA ERG, think about our African ancestry, or Open Out, or disability ERG, even our Asian Pac community, globally across Johnson & Johnson, we're actually using our ambassadors as a way, as I talked about earlier, is to equip people with information.
Great.
Linda?
Yeah, no, great examples. And I would say at Novartis, it's similar, that the ERGs have been very important in amplifying our messages, and also have served as a wonderful network so that we can inform each other about different activities that are going on, and how we can learn from them. I see Yolanda Little is part of the call, and when she worked at Novartis, she was really a key partner in working with some of the ERGs to really spread this message. So thank you, Yolanda. And yeah, the ERGs have been an incredibly important piece of this.
Shout out, Linda. I'll be a part of it. And good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So next do any of our panelists have advice on how to sell the value proposition of this work to stakeholders, such as clinical development or ClinOps teams? Because basically you're asking them to redo clinical trial designs, execution plans, workflows, etc. Anyone have any advice on that front?
Yeah, I mean, my advice would be, when we started Beacon of Hope, and it sounds like when, the other initiatives were started at Janssen and BMS, we were doing it because it was the right thing to do. But now it's business critical. With the passage of the IRA last year, we know that if you have a trial population when you submit that is not representative, that you risk either not getting approval, or getting a suboptimal label, or having significant post approval commitments. We have the journals, New England Journal, the JAMA journals are saying that they will look at your phase 3 data, and if the demographics are not representative, that they will not publish your phase 3 trials. We have CMS, has recent examples of where they have declined to cover new therapies because they did not think that the study population was representative. So, I mean, for those of us who are involved in drug research, just getting a program through phase 3 is a minor miracle, maybe not so minor, but to think about how you've done this, and because you didn't take those steps to make sure that your population is representative, to have, to jeopardize it at that point, it's a business critical issue at this point.
Mm-hmm. I'd just say ditto. I think from our perspective, it's finding a champion. I can think of, I was leading a diabetes program in the early 2000s, and know the challenges that we had with questions from the agency around the diversity of our sample, and how we really tried in a lot of ways pushing a boulder uphill to try to get the support to diversify and look for patients in that really matched the epidemiology of the study compared to post-pandemic and the business critical aspect, as Linda mentioned. It's been like night and day. I felt like I was alone on an island trying to really push diversity concepts earlier, and then now we've got support from a lot of people, some well-meaning but invasive, but they're still having the support of the broader organization, and for us, having the commitment that came from the CEO has really bolstered the need for us, and has gotten the attention that's deserved. So, but a lot of that too was through having a good senior leader champion who really defended us in terms of some of the decisions that we wanted to pursue, and having that regular connectivity to provide those updates, particularly since, as most people know, staffing is always a big challenge in trying to get the resources to help you with some of these activities. So, it's finding those champions and really leveraging them.
Great, thank you. Stacy, anything you want to add to this?
I don't have much to add. Again, I think those of us who've been around, and been in this work for a long time, remember, really being advocates of this work, and getting every reason why across the organization, whether it was, it'll slow enrollment down, or the funding for the trials or a challenge, or, all the reasons why they think that this is going to be problematic. But what I often say is, in the evolution of our diversity in clinical trials initiative has been about the data and being very intentional. So, we were writing diversity plans very early, working with AI and ML technologies, and looking at the data and looking at, regionality of prevalence of disease, and looking at data in terms of, where those particular patients were, and setting specific, goals for teams in terms of how they need to look at recruitment. And slowly but surely, that's what changed internally within Janssen in terms of this is something that can be achieved. And then, looking across the therapeutic areas, they saw one TA who's fully adopted, and then it became infectious across other therapeutic areas. But I often say, when you're intentional about this and you think about it through a diversity plan lens, and you bring teams around the table to talk about what can be achieved, it can be done. And it's not to say that it won't be difficult. It's very difficult sometimes that we, to have a difficult conversation and having to slow down a trial, or potentially, stop a trial to be intentional about diversity. But I've seen the benefit when your organization rallies around the intentionality of this work. And when we do that collectively, you see how, diverse participants not only raise their hand or informed, but our trials are much better in terms of the outcome on the backside of this when we plan effectively.
Maybe Stacy, we'll stay with you for a moment. So what would you say was your has been your greatest challenge on this front, and also your greatest success?
Listen, I always say, no matter how much we plan, right? I just talked about the diversity plans. I just talk about the data that we have. That all of our will cannot make a person walk through that investigator door. And all of our planning cannot make that happen, right? And all of our intentionality cannot make that investigator site just as passionate about diversity as I am. They may not share that same passion about diversity, right? So this becomes a very localized kind of conversation at a site level. And I think that's the biggest challenge, right? So at a corporate level, you can have the initiative. At a team level, you can have the willingness and desire. But at the end of the day, there's something local about that one-to-one interaction between the patient and an investigator who's enrolling it, unless you're in a decentralized trial environment, that becomes really acute. So I would say our biggest challenge and lesson learned that we're still working through is how do you affect that relationship one-on-one that's really separated from all of us in this work? Because that's really where that enrollment, that consent, that's what really happens. And a lot of us aren't sitting in that room for that to happen. So how do you affect that change and that desire to pull through the intention all the way through to the end of the study? And once you enroll them in the trial, you got to keep them in there, right? So what is that relationship building at the end of the trial too? And that brand awareness that keeps them wanting to stay and come back and participate in the trial. That's the piece I think all of us, right, are still trying to crack, is that sustainability long term.
Sharon and Linda, we're coming to you. Success and a challenge?
Yeah, so I think the challenge is, as Stacy mentioned, I think is long-term commitment and sustainable effort. I think Sharon mentioned, we have a reputation, well deserved, of being in and out of a community, when we have that's very drug specific, and that makes sense from a business standpoint. But in the long term, if we want the best data, for a range of programs across different disease areas, we have to take the time and really become embedded in have these practices embedded in our clinical trial efforts. So to me, that's the largest challenge, is keeping the interest and making sure that this isn't, another flavor of the month. I think biggest success has been, I've been surprised, honestly, by when we work with the HBU sites, how much trust they do have for their patients, that their patients have for them. So we thought that we'd really have to dig very deep into community trustworthiness, but they already have it. So I think that was a very pleasant surprise, and has enabled us to to move in other directions than we thought we would have to initially.
So
Thank you,
I'll pull up
Sharon.
the rear. So I think from my perspective, the greatest challenge is there's just not enough hours in the day. I think from, you could make a meal, that this could be your, and I have someone who's 100% dedicated to diversity in clinical trials. And that's, to me, both the blessing and the curse in terms of it's never enough. So that the sustainability, that was my mantra when we first kicked off the diversity is, my dream is that we work ourselves out of a job, that it becomes business as usual and is fully sustainable going forward. That's why a lot of our steps are built into SOPs and other activities. That we continue to chip away at that to get to that point. So to me, it's always more. And even, starting with US, the circle gets bigger and bigger, US to global, to the various dimensions of diversity. It just keeps growing, which is awesome. But that's probably our biggest challenge. The success, I think the thing I'm most proud of is my colleagues in industry. As we've all said in our respective presentations, this is truly a collaborative space. No one has really approached this in a competitive manner. We had, one of the things we found early on was the limitations of our data collection. We picked up the phone, reached out to the multiple counterparts at the other companies, had a dialogue. Turns out we're all having the same problem, particularly when you go outside the US. Patients don't define themselves the way our standard race and ethnicity criteria does. So that in and of itself is a huge limitation for patients. My colleague in the diversity and clinical trial space, I didn't become Hispanic until I came to the US. That's not how they see themselves. So, I think it's time for us, and certainly the collaboration with other sponsor companies, to meet these patients where they live and better understand their diversity experience. Is it I'm being treated at a public hospital versus a private hospital? Is it, that I'm eligible for this program or not eligible? So it's great having those sounding boards. It truly has been a collaborative space, and I'm definitely grateful that I have, colleagues in this space that willingly share. Walls don't go up, and it all helps us, to me, impact the greater good for patients. So thank you.
Thank you. And we are almost out of time. We do have one more question that I'll ask each of you to comment on with maybe a 15 to 20-second response, if you could. And that is, could you please highlight how you've been able to incorporate those who lack access to healthcare, especially African immigrants, if in fact you have had, if you have something to share on that front?
I know it's for us, it's something we're looking at now. It's how you put structure around it that we're still working through. So nothing substantive at this point to share.
I think we're all in the same boat, maybe in this one. I think the silence is, indicative of the opportunity.
Yes.
I think it's something we've thought about, but in terms of putting a strategy together and how we, again, collectively, because I don't think it's just one of us, approach this across the industry is something that's to be determined. But Linda, unless you have something.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that, I think within the last couple of years with, with at least standard of care being covered by Medicaid in some states, that has been helpful to, kind of expand potentially access for oncology trials specifically. But, looking at how we reach out to, recent immigrants, it's a challenge and something that's, definitely an important space.
Thank you. If anyone on the line has any thoughts on how to do that, please send them in and we'll be more than happy to share them with this group. I am sorry that we're out of time. We obviously could keep going. I'd like to thank all of you for participating. Clearly, thank you so very much to our speakers, Linda, Stacy, Sharon, for all the work that you're all doing there each and every day. Thank you to our health equity and clinical trial sponsors who've really made this important work that we're doing as a community possible. Thank you always to the BioNJ team, and specifically Randy Bromberg, our VP Communications and Marketing, who led the development of the database and today's program as well. We'd invite you to visit the database and again, submit your ideas. We will be announcing shortly the date for our second webinar, which will be on designing trials to broaden reach and expand diversity in the coming weeks. So until then, thank you so very much for all that you do on behalf of patients, because as we know, they can't wait. I wish you a wonderful afternoon.